Hello, welcome to the Daily Fantasy Flex Podcast, the NFL edition. I am your host, Bryan Mears. I'm joined by Matthew Freedman and Peter Jennings, aka CSU Ram 88. It is going to be our last podcast of the year for NFL, which is definitely bittersweet, but excited to talk about this last two-game slate. Before we get into that, though, let's talk a little bit about last week. Pete, how are you doing? How was your week? And any thoughts on just the crazy Vikings finish?
It was a great week. Off to a hot start in 2018. It was much needed after I lost my life savings investing in Amari Cooper and chasing the qualifiers in 2017. So pretty happy. I was in first place for most of Sunday after the Steelers game in the Thunderdome. Ended up moving to fifth on that Stephon Diggs catch, but I also had Diggs and cash, which was nice. So that was kind of a neutral play. It was obviously awesome for football, great game. The chalk has been hitting so far in NFL the first couple weeks. So excited about that. Always nice to get off to a good start. Interested to see how these next two games play out from a fantasy perspective. This is about as gross as it gets, but yeah, it's been great playoffs, and hopefully we can figure out some good ways to go to maybe get an edge in this slate. But I thought the two 4-game playoff slates were fun, and obviously I'm a little biased because I did well, but they were relatively chalky, and I think we hit on a lot of good plays. Yeah,
it's good when it's fun and profitable. That's the where you want.
It's not as fun when you're losing your house, which
right.
I know all too well.
Right. Yeah. So, Freeman, do you have any takeaways from last week? Overall, it seems like defenses really showing through. Minnesota, Philly, Jacksonville, three of the best defenses of the year, and then obviously Tom Brady.
Yeah, except I wouldn't say Jacksonville's defense really held the fort last week. But what's fascinating is although the chalk has hit in the 2 weeks of the playoffs, the underdogs have covered the spread 7 of 8 games, with that one exception being Tom Brady at home, and you don't bet against Tom Brady at home. So it's fascinating that we have this situation where in DFS the chalk is hit, and then in the sports betting side we have the underdogs covering. But yeah, as Pete said, it's been a very exciting run so far, and looking forward to this being a very good weekend of football.
For sure. So let's quickly just talk about the games, little slate dynamics here. So Pete, we have the Jags, Patriots, the Vikings, Eagles. Of note, the totals are way, way different on these two games. The Jacksonville Patriots game is at 46.5, and the Vikings, Eagles is at 38. Really, the big difference, though, is that the Patriots are implied for 28 points, and then all of the other teams are implied between 17 and 20 points. I know you play some of these primetime smaller slates. Have you experienced something like this where there's just like clearly one team that you want to load up on? And how would you deal with a situation like that?
Yeah, I play these slates all the time, and you load up on the chalk in these slates normally. Obviously, it's a little different when they're the primetime slates. There is advantages to being contrarian. That's probably actually where I did the worst this year, was playing the qualifiers, the 5K and 6K qualifiers. On the 2-game slates, had one in particular where I lost 2 Qs on the last play of the Bengals game. But yeah, it's for cash, it's easy. You load up on the obvious spot. For tournaments, there's a ton of game theory, and it's clearly somewhere I need to get a lot better. So hopefully we can talk through some of those elements. I know what's wrong. I know what not to do. And I can talk about that for tournaments specifically here. But, yeah, it's definitely one of those things where, you're going to gain a lot of leverage because ownership is going to be concentrated way more so than it is on bigger slates. With only 2 games, one obvious spot, it's going to be pretty obvious where people are going to go with the salaries.
I'd like to get Pete's thoughts on the Jags defense going against the Patriots offense, because Pete, I think more than a lot of other people really early in the year, even before the season started, was all over the Jags defense. And at times they have been so good. In DVOA, for Football Outsiders, they're number 1. At the same time, you can look at some of the other metrics they have there, And in terms of their variance, they're 29th. So they've been one of the most inconsistent defenses this year. And we've seen that. They've been up, they've been down. And then in terms of strength of schedule, they've been 31st. So they've had a really easy schedule. And we've seen them struggle at points against pretty good quarterbacks. They struggled 4 weeks or so ago against Jimmy Garoppolo, and then struggled last week against Ben Roethlisberger. So I'm curious. It looks like a spot, just in terms of the Vegas numbers, where people should be going with the Patriots, but it's hard to take players going against the Jags. But do you think we will see the Jags defense play well in this game?
This is the toughest spot. I mean, I have not picked on Pittsburgh or on Jacksonville really all year. The only guy I had, in this last slate was Le'Veon Bell. I do think the running backs make a lot of sense versus this defense, but it's going to be an interesting spot. Like, when you start analyzing the matchups, is someone like Jalen Ramsey going to be covering Gronk at all? How are they going to handle these receivers? Boye makes a lot of sense going up against someone like Cooks. So I do think that they can match up well against the Patriots. There is one recipe. I think there's one really interesting narrative that makes a lot of sense here. Basically, the kryptonite of Tom Brady and the Patriots over the last decade has been Tom Coughlin. And Tom Coughlin orchestrated this defense. And, Freedman laughs here, but the key is rushing four, dropping back those guys, and, basically getting to Tom Brady. And I think that the Jaguars are set up to do that. I know other people have brought up this narrative. I'm not saying it's a huge deal, but there is a recipe to disrupting this team, and I think the Jags could do it.
Yeah, the one thing I'll push back on that is that if not for some freak catches where Tom Coughlin had absolutely nothing to do with that, people wouldn't be talking about Tom Coughlin as the kryptonite.
I don't think it has anything to do with the offense. All I'm saying, those Giants defenses, when they won, they put pressure on Tom Brady with four guys, and that's how you beat them. Same thing when the Broncos beat the Patriots. They had a great defense. Von Miller got to Tom Brady. Like, that's the only recipe. Like, you can't blitz. You have to have guys that can win one-on-one and get to the quarterback. That's the only way to beat them.
Yeah, I totally buy that. I'm just saying I don't think that has much to do with Tom Coughlin. I think if it were another person who were overseeing football operations for the Jags, I think it would be exactly the same thing that we're seeing now. When the Ravens would give the Patriots a hard time back in the day, or the Jets back in the day, it was because they had really stout pass rushing, and they could apply pressure. And as you mentioned, we saw the same thing with the Broncos. We see that with the Jags now. I just don't think it has much to do with Coughlin. I just think it has to do with the defensive scheme. But yeah, if they beat the Patriots, it will be because they are able to generate a strong pass rush with the guys that they have, and then able to match up. I think the key is Gronk and how they're going to defend him. And the idea of them putting Jalen Ramsey on him, the Bills at one point earlier in the season were putting Tre'Davious White sometimes on Gronk, and that is interesting. But Ramsey was a guy who was kind of a hybrid defensive back when he was entering the league. Like, is he going to play corner? Is he going to play safety? So he does have some of that versatility, and he has, he's bigger than your typical cornerback. So I think he has more ability to match up with Gronk than some people might think. At the same time, like, Gronk going against a guy who is 50 pounds less than he is, I would take Gronk basically every time. So I will be curious to see if they match him up in that way.
Yeah. Do you think that's the way to beat the Patriots? Like, if you're going to take pass catch against the Jaguars, you think that's their weakness? Like, we look at DVOA against specific positions. Obviously, Jacksonville is number one against top wide receivers. No matter where you put your top wide receiver, either Bouye or Ramsey on either side, you're looking at one of the best cornerbacks. But against tight ends, Jacksonville was 20th in the league to tight ends on the year. So, do you think that Gronk is the guy that could give them the most fits?
Yeah, I think it's Gronk anyway, but then especially with this defense, because they are the strongest on the outside defending the guys at the wide receiver position who split out wide. So they're weakest in the middle of the field against slot receivers, against tight ends, and against running backs who come out of the backfield. And I think that is one of the areas where Brady has done well. Like, that plays to Brady's strengths. He's good at those short passes to his tight ends, to the backs out of the backfield, and then to, not Julian Edelman, but Amendola this year, running those shorter routes in the middle of the field. So it seems like Brady might be well suited to exploit this defense. It's just a question of whether the defense will do stuff that they haven't done before, put some of their key players in positions where we haven't seen them before to try to neutralize what the Patriots are going to do. And so, all of this is, I think this is the key matchup of the slate, the Patriots offense versus the Jags defense, and whether you think the Patriots are going to have success or not.
Well, here's the thing, too. I mean, I totally agree with everything you just said. The problem is if you want to pivot. So let's say you're like, okay, I'm going to do what everyone says not to do. I'm going to go against the Patriots at home. I'm going to invest in this generational defense, which I do think this defense is really, really good. Probably the best since that Broncos defense are right there with them, maybe better. The problem is if you don't do that, you're going to have to invest in Blake Bortles and the Jaguars, which is absolutely terrifying going onto the road in New England. Or you're going to have to invest in Nick Foles or Case Keenum, against, two of the other top defenses. So it's total garbage across the board in terms of, fantasy goodness. And the only, total that's enticing is this Patriots total, and 28 would be a high total any week. So I think that, basically what the line is telling us is that the Patriots offense should have success like they always do. And I think Matt brought up a lot of good points that this is what they're good at. They're good at throwing to the backs. They're good at hitting the slot receivers. And they have Gronk, who's a matchup nightmare for any team. And the Jaguars, I do think they have a good recipe. I think Jalen Ramsey is one of the best guys in the whole league to try to put on him, but the only time teams have had success with Gronk is double teaming him. So that might be a foolish thing that they try to do, is put Ramsey on him to single coverage him, and Brady basically picks him apart.
Yeah, that was silly of me. I wasn't exactly trying to ask if they should feature Gronk. That was obvious. It was more just how we thought his matchup was in comparison to other guys who want to prioritize. So, Pete, I guess my question is, is it good enough where, you're going to sort of start with Gronk in your cash games?
Yeah, sorry about that. I think I will. It's tough. Roster construction this week is interesting. You start looking at kind of some different builds. Obviously want to get Brady in there. You want to get some of these Patriots running backs. And you start looking at your lineups, and, fortunately, on FanDuel, you can just kind of play whoever you want. But on DraftKings, there's some tough decisions. These running backs are somewhat expensive. Deion Lewis is $8,100. You have the Minnesota receivers priced up. So there are some decisions to be made, but I think Gronk is going to be a priority for me, even at an elevated tag on DraftKings. On FanDuel, it's a no-brainer. You just jam in Gronk.
This might be a place where we can pivot to the other game, but Pete, any thoughts on going away from Gronk, maybe to Kyle Rudolph? I don't know about Zach Ertz with Nick Foles throwing him the ball and going against the Vikings defense, which I think is almost as good, if not just as good, as the Jags defense. So Zach Ertz might be off the table, but Rudolph might be interesting.
Vikings' second best team against tight ends all year.
Yeah.
It's a disaster. That especially too. We'll have to wait to see what the weather looks like. But I'm very, very concerned about the Eagles against this Vikings offense. I think they're really going to have to run the football to have a chance. So that's where I'd want to invest in if I'm the Eagles. Maybe someone like Nelson Aguilar out of the slot, who shouldn't see very much Xavier Rhodes at all. But it's going to be a hard challenge for the Eagles to put points on the board. So, Kyle Rudolph would probably be my favorite pivot. He's been a great touchdown scorer. I think, FanDuel, you can really make the argument because Gronk's probably going to be 70, 80% owned. So I don't hate it. Then that's what you have to do in these spots. You have to find some contrarian angle. And, the Jaguars could take the recipe that the Jets used at the end of the year and just double team Gronk. They could say, hey, all right, we're going to double team Gronk. We're going to use our corners, play one-on-one. And, we're not going to rush that many guys. We're going to rush 4 guys and beat us some way. That could be the recipe that they use. But there's so many ways for Gronk to win in this matchup regardless. So I think he's the clear chalk. And I think I like some other pivots a little bit more, but I don't hate it, especially with his ownership on FanDuel. On DraftKings, there's more argument from an equity standpoint to fade Gronk because he's so expensive.
Yeah.
But again, it's hard to spend the salary on both sides. It's tougher on DraftKings, but DraftKings, I'm interested to see his ownership. Like his equity ownership distribution is a little different than FanDuel, where he's just a slam dunk play for cash, but he's going to be so heavily owned that you might be able to get enough leverage that it makes sense in tournaments.
Yeah. So we usually start with quarterbacks and then work our way through in these playoff pods, but we started with tight end there. I think that actually was actually a good place to start because I think that's probably where you need to start with your lineup. So let's just jump around now. Let's go to running backs. And I think one thing I want to talk about specifically is let's stick with the Patriots and talk about the running backs. We saw James White play really well and get quite a bit of work. We had Rex Burkhead questionable. Matt, I'm curious what your thoughts are on like sort of the breakdown of these Patriots running backs. Can you use two of them on a small slate? I mean, what are your thoughts here?
I mean, maybe. Who knows? It's so hard. I think so much just depends on whether Rex Burkhead ends up being active this week or not. If he's not, it's so hard to invest in Dion Lewis, the most expensive guy, I think, on both sides at the running back position. So hard to invest in him, not the most expensive guy on FanDuel, second most expensive on FanDuel. But the good thing is that we did see him get a lot of targets last week, even with James White getting some decent work there. And I think that is probably going to continue. So I don't know. It's hard to invest in him, but I think if you are looking to go with running backs, you probably could go with two of them from the Patriots. I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah. Pete, it seems like James White actually might be the more popular one, at least in cash games, because like on DraftKings you were talking about, it's sort of hard just to fit all these guys in. It's definitely tighter pricing. So I don't think it's very reasonable to be able to get Tom Brady, Gronk, and then also get Dion Lewis. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, White's going to open up a lot of salary on DraftKings. That's where he makes the most sense, right? Like his price tag is enticing. You can fit every other Patriots player that you want to play. Regardless of the Burkhead situation, he's going to get snaps in the passing game. And I think he's someone that the Patriots will really try to utilize because he can win against linebackers, and that's a great matchup for them to take advantage of against this Jaguars defense, especially if they're getting a lot of pressure on Brady. Like nothing neutralizes the pressure better than screen passes, which the Patriots are also obviously awesome at. So I think he makes a lot of sense. I still like Dion Lewis. I think I like him more on FanDuel than I do on DraftKings. I mean, FanDuel is 7,700. He's an easy play. DraftKings, he's 8,100, where it's really challenging, like you mentioned, to get Brady, Gronk, and him in. So. Those are easy plays for me on both sides. I think you want exposure to both in tournaments. It'll be interesting to see what the practice reports are on Burkhead. I think he could be a sneaky contrarian GPP play if he's cleared. It is concerning that he did have a noticeable limp last week and was ruled out pretty early, but we'll see. That could be an intriguing option if he's healthy.
Looking at the other side of this, how interested are you guys in Leonard Fournette? He's going against the Patriots, who have been pretty good defensively since Week 7, just in terms of the number of points per game they've held opponents to and things like that. The first 6 weeks were horrible, but since then they've been much better. But even so, Leonard Fournette is intriguing in that the Patriots are 30th in rush DVOA on defense, and it seems as if it would be in the best interest of the Jags to just continue to run the ball to try to keep the Patriots offense off of the field. So even if they are in slightly negative game script, you could see them feeding Leonard Fournette quite a bit. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, he just has so much touchdown equity compared to the other running backs on the slate. What are your thoughts, Pete?
Yeah, on FanDuel, I'll probably play him. DraftKings, I probably won't. FanDuel, I'll probably play him. I think he's a good play. I don't think he's a great play. We saw against the Bills, they just sold out against the run, and it was really effective mitigating the offense. He was getting chunks against the Steelers. I don't know, they just look so bad on defense. I was really surprised. He was getting 4 or 5 yards and then breaking big ones. pretty much on every play. So I don't think that's going to happen against the Patriots. We saw what they just did to Tennessee and Derrick Henry. I think they're going to sell out against the run. I think Belichick's going to make Bortles beat them. So I'm concerned about taking him, but on FanDuel, I think the touchdown equity and just the opportunity where pretty much you can fit whoever you want, he makes a lot of sense. DraftKings, I'll probably fade and go get some of these receivers that I want. And there are some pivots at running back, and you could also play 2 Patriots running backs.
Yeah, that's seeming a little more enticing, when we look at these other matchups in this other game. Let's talk about the running backs in this this Philly-Minnesota game, Matt. Both teams are excellent against the run. Philly is 3rd in rush DVOA. Minnesota is 5th in rush DVOA. And then if you look at running backs in the passing game, Minnesota has been the best team all year, first against pass-catching running backs, and then Philly is 10th. So even if you're trying to decide between like Latavius and McKinnon, or like trying to take a chance on Ajayi, who just seems to have like the most brutal matchup in the slate, it's hard to like get excited about any of these guys. Do you like any of them, in GPPs, or are you back to the strategy of maybe just multiple New England guys?
Yeah, it's really tough because they are splitting the work evenly, and as you pointed out, tough matchups for both groups of running backs. The thing that I do like about Ajayi is that he continues to get a pretty consistent workload. The last month or so, ever since Foles has come in, they've really been feeding him, and he's been getting 15, 12, 14, 15 carries per game. And then also getting targeted much more than we've been used to seeing him get targeted. Got 5 targets last game and had 44 yards on the ground. So if you look over his last month of action, like he's around 100-ish yards per game, a little bit under that. So he's actually done decently well. He just hasn't been getting the touchdowns that you want to see out of a guy like that. And then with the matchup, it makes it tougher, but he's not expensive. And so I think if you are looking to pivot away, not for cash, but for GPPs, he is someone who is intriguing because, it's a similar situation to what we had last week. He's at home, a guy who's in the playoffs at home. He is the guy who's going to get the majority of the workload there at the running back position. So I think he's someone to take a chance on. I don't think he's going to have high ownership just because the Eagles haven't looked good with Foles at quarterback, but you never know. It's just one game.
Yeah, he's going to be a great play, I think, relatively. They should be giving him the ball way more than LeGarrette Blount. I don't know what they were thinking. I guess at the goal line, it makes a little sense. That's one concern, is his touchdown equity does go down. Yeah. If they're going to use Blount, in those, really short yardage goal line situations. But, I think Ajayi's a great play. I probably prefer him to someone like Latavius Murray. The interesting one to me in that game is going to be someone like Jerick McKinnon. Yeah. I'm always a sucker for him just with his freak athleticism and his involvement that we've seen in the passing game. The concern is he hasn't really been used in the passing game the last couple of weeks. But I don't know, Freeman, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it is that situation where he should be getting work in the passing game, but they haven't been giving it to him as much. So I'm a little more hesitant on him, especially because it just seems that they prefer to hand the ball to Latavius, 15 to 18 times per game and just let him get the work. So I don't know.
Target-wise, it was almost even last week. I think it was 4-2. It's not like Latavius or McKinnon was getting like 8 targets or something,
Yeah, I just always feel hesitant about taking the guy who is smaller, so probably doesn't have the touchdown equity, and then also isn't getting as many touches as the other guy. So he has to be in a situation where he gets more targets in order to make up for it.
Yeah. Let's move to the quarterback position, and we'll hit on wide receivers and then defenses. So like if you're not playing, I think Tom Brady in cash games, that's an interesting strategy. I guess the question is there enough like ownership equity with some of these other guys in tournaments? Pete, like if you're having 5 GPP lineups, are you going to have any other quarterback, like maybe some Bortles, or are you sort of sticking to Tom Brady?
I will probably play a Bortles lineup. That's the guy I'm most intrigued with if I'm pivoting away from Brady. We've seen the rushing upside that he possesses, which could, listen, this slate could be just ugly as hell. And like Bortles throwing for 200 yards and a rushing touchdown could be like enough to win.
That's true. That's true.
So I don't hate it. I think the Patriots are going to sell out against the run. They're going to force Blake Bortles to beat him. Maybe Blake Bortles wakes up and looks over at his ex. I don't know if he's still with that same girl, but she's hot. So I'm sure he's got some nice motivation. Yeah, that's some deep analysis right there. He's got a hot girlfriend like most NFL quarterbacks, and he's got rushing upside. So that's the guy I'm on.
Pete's bringing it.
This is horrible. I mean, I understand the analysis, and Blake Bortles I think will have pretty low ownership, but he is. I mean, the thing is he's so inconsistent and volatile, and that is a reason why you maybe would want to play him in tournaments. But he's looked so bad recently. In his last 3 games, he's completed 44, 52, and 53% of his passes. Like he's horrible, and I know that there's some rushing upside there, but rushing upside I don't think is I don't know. I just might be wrong, but I don't think like that's really what you're looking for in tournaments. I think you want a guy who can stack up with the receiver, multiple receivers maybe, and like you can get lots of aerial goodness to accumulate yards and touchdowns all over the place. And if it's just Bortles out there running for 35 to 60 yards, like that's okay, I guess, but it just seems like that doesn't benefit any of the wide receivers at all.
Yeah,
it's going to be tough. And I don't know if he's still with her, but if you just type in Blake Bortles' girlfriend on the Google machine with images, I just was reading, I think they broke up in 2014. So that hurts his projection by about 10%, but she's a smoke show.
So Pete is like 3.5 years behind the news on that.
Yeah, I just remember, I mean, that's what I was bullish on him coming into the draft was the smoke show girlfriend. So tried to bring it back here for the podcast to
that was the pre-NFL girlfriend.
Yeah, maybe he's got someone else.
We need Levitan. He's always got the strong takes.
He's got really strong takes on team sex.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
Bortles is if you watch some of his other videos, he's got some really donkey comments. He's doing like an MTV Cribs thing, and this hot girl asks him like, "Oh, so what do you do when you get out of bed in the morning?" Or like, "What do you do first thing in the morning?" He's like, take a piss."
Actually, that sounds like a pretty reasonable statement.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's probably what does happen. But come up with something a little bit.
Yeah, doesn't have much game.
Well, he's just a straight shooter. I mean,
That's not, as a quarterback, you got to play the game, though. You got to be able to, you got to be able to play the game a little bit. These guys are coming in. You got to deceive the defense or at least understand what they're trying to do and counter it. Most quarterbacks are pretty clever, the successful ones. So I don't know. Long story short, the quarterbacks freaking suck outside of Tom Brady.
But you might have a Bortles lineup.
I'm going to have a Bortles lineup.
We need to get a T-shirt that says "I played Bortles in a conference."
Who should I stack him with? Marquise Lee or Dede Westbrook?
Dede,
of course. Yeah.
I think Dede. I mean, I feel like if there's a guy who can beat the Patriots, it's someone who can run right by them. Like going deep. And I think that's more Dede. But just to bring this back on why Bortles is a horrible play.
No, he is a horrible play. Can you sell me on why Keenum or Foles is a better play, though?
They're not. But I mean, the Patriots haven't allowed a 300-yard passer since week 7. Like the first 6 weeks of the season, their defense was in disarray. They were incorporating Stephon Gilmore into the secondary, and so they were just getting torn up by quarterbacks. But since then, not once have they allowed a 300-yard passer. Like they've actually been pretty decent on the back end. It's still like a bend but don't break defense the way it always is with the Patriots, but they are like pretty insistently not breaking, and they're holding teams outside of the end zone. So that would be like the one thing where like, do you really want to count on Blake Bortles throwing for 300 yards against a defense that just doesn't let quarterbacks do it anymore?
He's not throwing for 300 yards. We're buying him because he's averaging 8.2 yards per carry.
Freeman, come on.
The playoffs. I mean, 10 carries, 88 yards versus Buffalo. I mean, we're creeping towards that DraftKings bonus with the rushing equity.
Well, if that's true, then why are you asking who you should stack him with?
You got to stack him with one guy because he's got to at least throw a touchdown too. It's not like he's going to just
You're talking like he's Michael Vick. This is a guy who's thrown – how many touchdowns has he thrown this year? Like 13? Like,
all right, buddy.
Would you stack him?
I got some fire coming for you here in just a second. I got to look up his career averages rushing the football are pretty good. He's averaging 6.3 yards per carry over his career.
You could stack him
touchdowns in the last 4 years. He's rushed for 1,400 yards. I mean, I'm not saying he's Michael Vick, but I mean,
you could stack him with
a
Fournette.
little bit.
Okay, we've talked enough about Blake Bortles. I think Keenum is the guy.
Wait,
outside of Bortles.
One more question for you, Freedman. Who is better, Blake Bortles or Josh Allen?
Josh Allen, just because I don't know. No, actually, it has to be Blake Bortles. I don't know, Josh Allen. Because I've seen Blake Bortles be horrible in the NFL. I think there's a chance that Josh Allen, if he gets developed and gets to sit on the bench, might not be horrible by the time he becomes a starter. But they're both really bad.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
Okay, so Case Keenum, he has the best wide receivers. I think left. Thielen and Diggs are a fantastic combination. So I think you easily know who to stack him with. He has a really good tight end. He has a good receiving back. And it's very possible that the Eagles' offense could be absolutely atrocious and turns the ball over a lot, gives the Vikings some extra possessions, gives them good field position. And like Jalen Mills, I believe I might be talking about the wrong defensive back here, but I believe that is Jalen Mills who has allowed the most receiving touchdowns out of any cornerback in the league. Like the Eagles secondary at points, it's good, but it also can really allow opposing quarterbacks sometimes to tear them up. So I don't know. I would be going with I believe Keenum over Bortles if I had to pivot off of Brady.
Fair.
Decent point. I probably think Keenum's better than Bortles, but I wanted to talk about him.
I mean, the ownership discrepancy between the two could be enough to make Bortles the sharper play. Like, that's very possible.
Yeah, Keenum probably comes in number 2. I mean, I think all three quarterbacks are really similar. Just this Eagles defense has been so good, too. You're going on the road. We'll see what the weather is.
Yeah.
It is interesting wide receivers, though. Pete, you're asking who to stack Bortles with. I mean, even if you don't take Bortles and need to stack them with, like, just the pricing of some of these guys, like, you might have to go a Jacksonville receiver. And we said, of course, Dede over Marquise, but Marquise did lead them in targets last week. 6 versus 3.
I might be on the Marquise Lee train over here.
Yeah. I think I was a little quick to say that. He did get more targets last week. So that's going to be interesting to see whether you're, like, in cash games, if you have to fit in Marquise Lee at 4.4 or like a Dede at 3.9. I mean, they're so cheap. But let's start talking about the wide receivers, Pete. It seems like it's going to be pretty hard to pay up for like a Thielen or Diggs, even though they are the best receivers, I think, by quite a bit on the slate.
Yeah, I like Thielen and Diggs. They're obviously expensive. I think their tournament plays more so than cash game plays. I'm intrigued by Amendola and Hogan. I think those guys are interesting. I assume Cooks is going to have a tough time with Bouye. That's why kind of the matchup I'm anticipating. He's still a good tournament flyer. He can get behind anyone. But I think he probably is going to see shadow coverage in that regard. Other interesting guys, I mentioned Nelson Aguilar out of the slot. I think he could do all right. I think Alshon Jeffrey is going to see Xavier Rhodes and really struggle. You talk about, the Jags receivers, it's pretty gross. I think I prefer Marquise Lee. If you want to find any of these cheap guys, like, it's pretty tough. I do like the Minnesota guys, but it's just hard to figure out kind of where to go. I mean, this is definitely the toughest position and what's going to win, cash games and GPPs. And my hunch right now is to kind of go the slot guys for the Patriots and then maybe take one of the Minnesota guys. But I could be talked into some other stuff. What are you guys thinking?
Yeah, I like that. So I think Jalen Mills, I'm looking this up here at PFF. Jalen Mills has allowed 9 touchdowns on the year, not counting playoffs. That's 2 more than any other cornerback this year. So Jalen Mills is very exploitable, and I think we're going to see a matchup of Diggs going against him. I think Diggs is the guy. I mean, Thielen gets a lot of targets, some great usage in the slot, but I think Diggs is the guy I would probably prefer, especially because he is the cheaper of the two.
Fair enough. So, all right, let's talk about like contrarian ways to build a team here. So, if you go Brady and Gronk, I think that's going to be like the cash game play. So, I mean, what's a way to be contrarian? Is it like paying up for both Thielen and Diggs and paying up at the wide receiver position? You think that is a viable strategy, Matt?
Yeah. Let's do some building within our models. So you could like lock in Brady. You can lock in Gronk, and then 1 second. Let me do some stuff. Or you can lock in Gronk and then just optimize and see what happens, and then like build backwards from there. And what that does is it gives you a lineup that is absolutely unplayable. Like Brandon Bolden is in there. You absolutely can't play him. But it has Leonard Fournette in there. It has D.D. Westbrook. It has Marquise Lee. So also does have Adam Thielen in there. But I think if you want to go with Brady and Gronk, I think the next place to go is to start looking for cheaper running backs that you can feel comfortable living with. And, you know, we've talked about James White. He's probably someone you might have to go with.
I think you have to.
Yeah. And then I think it's a question of whether you're getting maybe some overexposure to the Patriots offense, but that's probably impossible considering that they're implied for 28 points and everyone else is way below that. Right. James White is interesting. And I think Ajayi is also interesting, probably too dangerous for cash games, but he is interesting just considering that I think we can lock him in for probably like 14 to 19 touches. And I think 14 is probably on the low end. So considering that he's, behind Lewis, behind Fournette, cheaper than Murray, even cheaper than Burkhead, I think he has a pretty good amount of value there for the touches that you can project.
Yeah, it's interesting to try to project ownership for these players. So, Pete, like, how would you expect ownership to be distributed at the wide receiver position? I mean, it does seem that Thielen and Diggs are the best wide receivers, by far. But I don't know, like Marquise Lee, D.D., Chris Hogan, it seems like if you want to go Brady and Gronk, like that 4K, 5K range is like just where you have to go. So do you think those guys are going to be maybe even more popular or just as popular as the top end guys?
Yeah, I think Chris Hogan will be popular. That's one guy I think that is going to gain traction throughout the week. Obviously, he only had the one catch for a touchdown, but at his price tag, I think people will be attracted to him. Marquise Lee is starting to stand out a little bit more. I don't know. I'm starting to like this Marquise Lee call. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's just gross. I mean, like receiver is just a very challenging position. You want to pay up for Thielen or Diggs, but then you have to compromise someone like Gronk. So,
Marquise Lee is showing up nicely in our models. And
yes.
I mean, he is the guy who has been getting targets for that team when he's been healthy. In terms of tournaments, I prefer Westbrook because I think he's a more explosive player. But yeah, for cash, you might have to go with Marquise Lee. So I've been building a lineup over here, and it has Brady. It's not a horrible lineup, but Ajayi is in there, Marquise Lee is in there, Hogan is in there. If you want to go with Gronk and Brady, that might have to be the route that you go. And also cramming in White and Ajayi.
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting lineups if you go both of them. If you go Lee and Dede and like Kobe, then you can really get up. Yeah, then you can get up to like White and Fournette, which is intriguing. Yeah, so I mean that is literally the whole game stack, and then you go I don't know, like one guy from another game. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Pete, like, are game stacks, like, I know they're viable in 2-game slates, but are they, like, is there an edge to, like, I know Bales had mentioned, I think in the last Three Donkeys pod, that, like, on these short slates, he, like, stacks it way more than you probably should, but, like, how do you do that? Is it just, like, every position but one?
I've done mostly game stacks in these, and obviously I didn't have a ton of success in the queues, but I still think it's right. I've had success in prior years, especially in tournaments, doing that. You just have to hope one of the games shoots out. And you can have dramatic differences when this comes to fruition. So I think that makes a lot of sense for tournaments and leagues. I think Patriots onslaughts make a lot of sense on DraftKings for cash. Just trust the numbers, and I have no problem running it back. I mean, we saw it last week. It was a perfect example. I mean, that's part of the reason I had a great week, was basically had a Patriots onslaught with Le'Veon Bell and then Corey Davis and Eric Decker, and the garbage time for Corey Davis and Eric Decker was amazing. And I could see that come to fruition as well with the Jaguars. So I have no problem with it. I think that's a pretty savvy strategy, honestly.
One question here. I feel disgusting mentioning this, but like Torrey Smith at 3,000, I mean, I don't know. He's not going to have Xavier Rhodes on him. He's not going to have Terrence Newman on him in the slot. He's going to be going against Trey Waynes, who is, of the 3 starting cornerbacks for the Vikings, the weakest. All it takes is a couple of receptions and, 30, 40 yards for him to hit some value at 3,000. Is he anyone that we would be considering or not really?
Like the call. Torrey Smith, he can catch a 60-yard touchdown, 3K. I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Interesting.
What do you guys think? I mean, like, I think it's fine. I mean, I think
a 2-game slate. Yeah, in a 2-game slate, if you're going to get like that percentage of snaps, I think. Yeah, I mean, like in a big GPP, you got to be contrarian somehow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk defenses. So obviously, only 4 to choose from. Minnesota is the highest priced at 3.8. New England at 3.5. Philly's at 3, and then Jacksonville, number 1 in DVOA, is the cheapest defense of the slate at 2.8. Pete, what are your thoughts on the dynamic? Obviously, Jacksonville is going to be the lowest owned because everyone's going to want to take the Patriots. But do you have a favorite defense? And then what are your thoughts on Jacksonville's defense? In that Bortles lineup, are you going to use the Jacksonville defense in that one?
No, probably not. Maybe, though. I mean, I definitely like the Pats defense the most here. I mean, going against Bortles is pretty much a dream spot. This is what 2-game slates turn into. You're like, oh, that's a contrarian quarterback, but I also am going to load up on the defense against him. And also in these slates, the defense and the quarterback can be – that correlation's not nearly as bad as people think. In fact, it can be somewhat positive in certain scenarios. So
a quarterback in his own defense?
Quarterback and the opposing defense.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, it sounds crazy, but it can work out, especially slates.
Well, last week was the defense is like stood as well last week, right? The Jacksonville one, yeah.
Yeah, these are the scenarios where it works out. Like, Bortles starts off like a total chump and throws like a pick 6 and maybe has like a fumble and a touchdown. The Eagles, the New England scores a couple touchdowns defensively. And then Brady doesn't see the field, and it's just a bunch of garbage time against prevent defenses for Bortles most of the game, and he racks up a lot of yards, gets some BS rushing yards, and gets there in garbage time. And we've seen that in other situations where there's high-scoring shootouts, and I think there's an example with the Saints where they were a great defense and the opposing quarterback still did all right. So I don't hate that, especially on a 2-game slate. My next favorite defense is definitely Minnesota. You're gonna have to pay up for them. Against Foles, who's definitely prone to making mistakes. Philly defense is fine. I mean, you have great options here. All these defenses are elite. It's playoff football, and we have basically the best defenses left outside of New England, although they have been really good since week 7.
One thing that is interesting, I think, is going with, it's total contrarian, but for the tournaments where you're going to be pivoting away from Brady, going with the Jags defense because it is still elite. It will probably have lower ownership. Stacking with Fournette and then just, game stacking the other game with one of the quarterbacks, hoping that it turns out. I think getting some exposure to the Jags defense is probably a smart contrarian way to go. because it is always possible that they, you know, like the elite version of the Jags defense shows up.
Agreed. Okay. I think we've exhausted this 2-game slate. You guys have any strong takes on the lines? It looks like New England currently is 9-point favorites. They're getting 61% of the spread bets. This data courtesy of the Action Network main site, actionnetwork.com. So definitely go on there and see this data. Minnesota, Philly, pretty much even on both spread bets and money. Minnesota is a 3-point favorite. Any thoughts on those lines? And what are you guys hoping to see for a Super Bowl, Pete? I'll start with you.
Well, I'm going to be in Vegas with Bales this weekend, so we'll probably be doing a little bit of content. I'm sure we'll be degenerates and fire on these games. I like the Jaguars getting this many points. Very scary taking anyone going into New England. Tons of scenarios where you can see New England just absolutely crushing them. But, it's the AFC Championship game. You're getting a ton of points. I hope that a ton of public money comes in on the path, maybe pushes it to 10. But, I like the Jags quite a bit, getting that. Not quite a bit. I think I think these lines are relatively efficient. But if I had to pick one right now, I would take the Jags getting 9.5 points.
So I've the last month or so, I guess a little longer than that, I've started going through the exercise of really trying to do two different things. One, creating what I think the lines will be, but then where I think the advantage is. And the numbers are – I'm with Pete there. The numbers that I have are telling me to go with the Jags, but like the I don't know, like the square in me who like looks at against the spread records for like the Brady Belichick era, like the thought of picking against Brady at home in the playoffs is just kind of scary.
Against Bortles.
Yeah, against Bortles. Like if
Bortles going into New England where they've covered like every single time. So yeah, it feels great.
Yeah, it's so the numbers are telling me one thing and like my gut is telling me something else there. So it feels to me like a stay away situation. My numbers are also telling me to go with the Eagles, which is just like whatever. But one thing that I really am interested in is the under for the Vikings-Eagles game. Vikings games have kind of more periodically gone to the under, and then especially with Foles at quarterback, the Eagles have been underperforming on offense, and they still have a very strong defense. So it is a situation where in 4 of the games with Foles, 3 of them have been driven to the under. I know it's a small sample, but like pretty convincingly they've gone to the under. So that is something that I'm paying attention to a little bit more.
Yeah. It is interesting, the big narrative looking ahead to the Super Bowl is Minnesota as the host. And I think we've had a lot of content about what a line would be if Minnesota was in the Super Bowl, like against New England. And I've seen a lot of people think that it would be about a pick'em. Pete, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, Brady versus Case Keenum as a pick'em.
No chance it's a pick'em.
I don't think it'll be a pick'em.
No chance it's a pick'em. I would say Pats -4. Really? That comes to fruition, and I will be firing the Vikings. That's what I'm hoping happens.
Everything I'm seeing is like below
maybe
2.
It's 3.5, but no chance it starts off as a pick'em. If it starts off as a pick'em, the books will get just pounded with Patriots.
I don't think it'll start off as a pick'em just because they know where the public money is going to be at. But everything I'm seeing is like 2 or under.
I was gonna say one more prop bet for the show, and my record of prop bets for the show speaks for itself in a very negative way.
-3. You guys are talking to me -3, but there's no way it's less than -3.
Let's take a bet on that. I will say that it's -3 at the most, but I would say let's say if it's -3, it's a push.
It's a push. And then anything below, we win.
I'll give you both that. It's probably more likely to maybe 4 and 3.5 is a little greedy since they'll essentially be the home team. But man, I'll do it. I think you guys are getting in slightly good, but I think more to think about it's going to be a -3. Pat's -3.
I think it'll start at -2.5.
No chance.
So the question is what it should start at versus what it should actually be. And it's going to be shaded towards the Patriots.
I shouldn't say no chance because I just said that I'm worried about the side.
Yeah, it'll be shades for the Patriots, but I don't know. I don't think it'll be I don't think it'll be 3 or above. I don't know. We'll see. We can find out about it. It's an interesting conversation to think about. Okay, yeah. So let me.
What if it's the Jags at the Vikings? What do you guys think the line will be?
Oh God.
I don't know. That would be so hard to say.
But that would mean that the Jags beat the Patriots in Foxborough. So you have to.
Jalen Ramsey's Notre Dame if that's the case.
I don't know. I mean, I think in that instance, Vikings would be favored by at least 3 points.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Maybe like 4.5. But I really don't know.
It'll be fun to speculate on. We have that prop, which hopefully will be good for you. Well, hopefully good for me, but maybe it'll bring Freedman a little bit out of the gutter. Ryan, you have the final prop numbers here?
I do.
They're horrible.
All right. Year to date. I'll start with you, Pete. You went 144 and 124. So you were 20 games over, or 20 props over 500.
With some volume, might I add.
With some volume. Yeah, it's strong volume.
If only those props actually translated to dollars instead of last year I did very well in DFS, bad in props. I'll take that again this next year instead of doing and good in props.
There you go. Matt. You had good volume.
This hurts Freedman more than the money, though. I can tell. I love it.
It's a lot of Coors Light.
You were 118 and 138. You were 20 games under, or 20 props under 500.
That's not that bad.
That's not nearly as bad as I thought it would be. I can live with that.
That's respectable. That's some good volume. Look at your volume there.
Yeah,
not bad.
I will say that your record was definitely brought up by the Amari Cooper versus Michael Crabtree year-long bet that we got against Pete at the beginning of the year. Pete would have been like 40 games.
Double down on that. Although Crabtree's most likely gone next year, but I would double down. That was still big.
It's really unfortunate the Raiders were losing their number 1 wide receiver.
Wow.
Bite your tongue. You bite your tongue.
Wow. I finished 80 and 60, so 20 above 500, but not the volume. So I'll give Pete.
Brian, and then just talk a little smack. I mean, we got to get you to put more volume in. Just you can take some clout there.
I mean, yeah, I didn't want to put in volume because with this win rate, it would be unfair to Freedman. I mean, like, what would Freedman be if I put in the volume?
There we go. Good. I like it. Some jabs. I like it.
Good.
But I mean, next year, next season, if you guys really want that, then we'll bring it.
Wishing there's some vodka in that drink that he's loving down.
We've got Freedman, he's coming off a top 10 Fantasy Pros finish. He needs to be brought down next year again.
He did win some money on that though, so congrats on that, Freedman. Sorry for the delayed payment there, buddy, but we're all settled. I should have sent you an extra $1 or something for interest. But, congrats.
We're all good. Yeah, thank you. We're all good. And next year, spot me. Give me like a little equity on and another Amari Cooper prop, and we'll be all good.
Okay, all right, no problem. I love betting Amari Cooper. Nothing wrong with that.
Last things, our guests did not finish well. They finished about 20 games or 20 props under 500 as well. So,
really? Because they were smoking at one point for I think the first half of the season.
Yeah, and then Pete and I turned it on. So stop giving them so much equity. But
really, I think what happened was I would give them so much equity just to kind of loosen them up a little bit and get them thinking that like they can just take whatever.
That's my patented move.
What are you talking about? I was giving away so much equity to the guests. I was letting them steamroll me.
That's why. Well, you go back to it last year. That's really what happened. Like everyone was so tentative, and I just was like, "All right, I'll take Amari Cooper over 100 yards, no problem." Yeah,
that is what happened, and so I took the mantle of being the generous guy with the guests this year. That explains 100% of why I was horrible with prop bets this year.
That is it. That is it. All right.
Everyone needs an alibi. I get it.
Before we get out of here, Freedman, who will the Super Bowl contestants be?
Patriots versus Eagles.
Peter.
And the Patriots are going to crush them.
Peter, who are the Super Bowl contestants?
Yeah, Patriots, Vikings. I'll take the chalk.
I like it. Awesome. we're going to end it there. Thank you guys so much for listening this year. We really enjoy doing these podcasts every week for you guys. Appreciate all the feedback that we have gotten, both on Twitter and with our YouTube video viewers as well. So thank you guys for supporting us as always. Good luck in this final week, and we will talk to you guys next year.